Hello and welcome to Auto Shenanigans. How the devil are you? Have you had a good week? My name is John. Thank you very much for joining me for another exciting Great British Road Journey. Today we'll be exploring the county of Wiltshire. We would have done this earlier in the series, but I sort of forgot it exists, but no bother. Wiltshire is a sparse area of countryside, 11% of which is allocated for military use and training purposes. Happy days, that means 11% less of a county for me to travel around. But Wiltshire is perhaps most well known for its vast collection of pointless rock circles and formations.
We're going to do Stonehenge tomorrow.
No, we're not going to do Stonehenge.
Today we'll be taking a journey from Malmesbury to Trowbridge, and as always, to help navigate our way around, we'll be using my 1923 Michelin guidebook, period correct maps, and we begin with the 12th century Malmesbury Abbey. We do indeed, and according to my guidebook, what we're looking for is the Abbey ruins, which at first glance seem to be fictitious because this Abbey is still very much in use. It's only when you look closer that you start to realise that, yeah, actually some parts of the Abbey look a little bit out of place and are definitely in a poor state. What's the deal? The easiest explanation is to show you this picture that I stole from Wikipedia. The lighter areas are what we're looking at today, and as you can see, we're missing some rather large sections of what was once, no doubt, a very impressive structure. In the 1500s, a fierce storm destroyed much of the Abbey, leaving less than half remaining, which in later years was made structurally sound and it reopened as a church. So my guidebook isn't wrong when it says there's some Abbey ruins, but it's also far from a pile of stones. Interestingly, Malmesbury's market cross, which is found but a stone's throw from the Abbey, is possibly made from stone salvaged from the ruins of the Abbey. I say possibly because we're not actually sure. The market cross features in my guidebook, presumably because, unlike a lot of the other ones that we've looked at throughout the series, this one is actually quite nice to look at. The ornate octagonal building stands at around 40 feet high, and you'll notice that there's something slightly out of place when compared to the rest. These little towers on each of the corners are called pinnacles. They don't serve any function other than decorative, but one doesn't match all of the others, and this is because in more recent times a heavy goods vehicle crashed into it and it fell off, and now we've got this thing. Let's move on to our next destination, the town of Chippenham. To get there, we'll be using mostly the A429, which, to begin with, follows the route as per our period correct maps, no problem. But then we arrive at a roundabout which doesn't feature on our old maps, so something has clearly changed. Actually, quite a lot has changed. There's a lot to discuss within this small area, starting with the road changes. There are not one, but two abandoned roads to be found here. The older of the two has been abandoned for quite some time, and it used to follow this route coming off the A429. The road was replaced, I think, in the 1960s or 1970s with a road that did the same thing but along a different alignment, but this too was replaced in the 2020s with the road and roundabouts that we see today. The recent changes were made because a new entrance was constructed to part of an airfield that sits next to our abandoned roads, and if you're passing this way, keep an eye out for the old aircraft hangars that sit alongside the new road. Today they're used for storage and by various businesses, but they're nice buildings nonetheless. And now, Chippenham. In the days of my guidebook, Chippenham was a fairly small town with around 7,500 residents, and until the mid-1800s, not a lot happened really. There was the odd bit of the wool industry before moving into dairy and food produce, but it wouldn't be until the railways came along that things really started to take off, with companies like Nestle setting up a large factory in the town in 1873. The factory was their first UK operation, and the main product they made here was canned condensed milk, an item that achieved worldwide sales and was a great success. The factory would close in 1962 and was mostly demolished, with this building now converted to offices being the only surviving structure. My guidebook suggests that maybe we'd like to visit Caen Hill, which is found a short distance to the west of Chippenham. It's a field, but within that field is what's known as Caen Hill Long Barrow, and I assume this is what my guidebook is referring to. It must be, there's nothing else here. A long barrow is not only a device used for the transportation of materials, it's also a place of burial, or a burial chamber if you will, and here at Caen Hill we find a very well preserved example of such a thing. Whilst we can't be exact, barrows like this usually date back to the year 3000 BC and were quite a common thing, used simply as a place to bury people, quite often in large groups, with the mound left over serving as a monument to those buried there. To be fair, they didn't just chuck everyone in a massive hole and call it a day. There are several chambers leading off a main area, and it's estimated that there are around 500 of these barrows spread across the country, but it seems Wiltshire and the surrounding area have received the majority share. Lovely, let's move on, and we're heading to Melksham next. The easy way to get there from Caen Hill is to use the A350 around Chippenham, but to stay true to our period correct maps, we'll need to head through Chippenham using the B4528 and pick up the A350 a bit later on. Interestingly, we'll pass through the village of Lacock, where I notice a drone flight restriction in place, which is a bit odd. It turns out that the private home of Queen Camilla is located here, so, you know, that's something. Despite Melksham being a fairly small town, it's probably one of the most industrial in Wiltshire because the town is or was home to Avon tyres, a company that started way back in 1885 in a place called Limpley Stoke. Initially, the company were working out of an old clothing mill, but by 1900 they'd moved to Melksham to start producing bicycle tyres and then automotive tyres in a purpose-built factory. 1906 was probably where things started to really get going for the company with the introduction of the Avon tyres brand, a brand that's still going today. But it wasn't just car tyres that they made, they dabbled with all sorts of things from bath mats to conveyor belts to golf balls, and interestingly the company later sold their golf ball manufacturing arm off to Dunlop, who are still making them today. By all accounts, it's a great success story for Melksham and Wiltshire, but like all good stories, there has to be an end, and in the 1990s, the company was sold to Cooper Tyres, although to be fair, they kept the factory going until 2023, but announcements were made that the factory would be closing in its entirety so that production could be moved elsewhere, and this marked the end of over 100 years of the tyre industry in Melksham. The factory's up for sale if you fancy it. A short distance to the east of Melksham is a series of canal locks known as Caen Hill locks. Here we find 16 locks, one after another, but that's not all, because in total, to traverse this section of canal, you'll need to use 29 locks. Surely at this point you'd just drive, but if you insist, after 5 or 6 hours worth of work and effort, you would have climbed a whopping 237 feet. The locks are situated on the Kennet and Avon Canal, which runs for around 87 miles, and interestingly, whilst it's called a canal, sections at either end are actually navigable rivers. The only man-made canal part is the bit in the middle that connects it all up. It all dates back to the early 1700s when construction would start on making those rivers navigable, and the entire project wouldn't be completed until 1810. As is usually the way with canals, the railways came along and ruined them overnight, and as a result the Kennet and Avon Canal fell into a state of disuse. It would sit abandoned until the 1960s, at which point a near 30-year restoration programme would begin, and by the 1990s the canal and locks would reopen, and it's now a popular tourist attraction. Visiting the Caen Hill locks has put us slightly out of the way, but we'll get back on track via the A361, which follows the period-correct route for the most part until we reach the A350, where because of its construction we're forced onto a new alignment. The road used to go this way, but that's no longer possible. Anyway, it doesn't really matter, the A361 takes us where we need to be. Which is Trowbridge. In the days of my guidebook, a busy town with over 12,000 residents, and as of 1889 it's been the county town of Wiltshire, which is odd considering there are larger towns and indeed a city in Wiltshire, but whatever. Trowbridge's largest contribution to society is probably within the woolen cloth industry, a thriving industry within the town that lasted for the best part of 500 years, with the last mill closing in 1982, with most traces of this previous industry having been redeveloped into shopping centres or supermarkets. A similar redevelopment on Bradley Road would see the demolition of a secret factory that was rather critical during the Second Small Disagreement of 1939 to 1945. The Spitfire aircraft was initially produced miles away in Southampton, but it very quickly became apparent that the factory's location on the south coast left it vulnerable to enemy forces, so they set up several secret factories around the country to ensure that the production of Spitfires went uninterrupted. One such secret factory, the Bradley Road Works, was set up in Trowbridge to manufacture Spitfire fuselages and wings. Once completed, they'd be transported to the nearby Keyville airfield for final aircraft manufacture and assembly. They would then be flown out of the airfield to their new homes, presumably over the English Channel or in Germany. To end, I've come to a place called Avoncliff, a short distance to the northwest of Trowbridge, and here we find a rather nice aqueduct. It opened in 1805, and it's on the same canal that we looked at earlier, the Kennet and Avon. It's a 100-metre-long three-arch structure that ever since its opening has been nothing more than a pain in the arse because of water leaks and sagging of the central arch. It's had many repairs and remedial works over the years, the last of which was in 1980 when the aqueduct was fitted with a concrete cradle to make it watertight as part of the canal's restoration. Bonus round, from the aqueduct you can get a view down onto Avoncliff railway station, and it's an interesting railway station because its platforms aren't long enough for any train that ever stops there. It possibly has the shortest railway platforms of any railway station in the country, long enough for only 1.5 coaches. And there we are then guys, that's all we've got time for this week. Thanks very much for watching, I hope you liked the video. If you did, there is of course a button specifically for that, and if you haven't subscribed already, please consider doing so. That would be wicked sweet awesome. Enjoy the rest of your week, whatever it is you get up to. My name's John, you've been watching Auto Shenanigans, and I'll see you guys next time for another exciting Great British Road Journey. Until then, take care, bye bye.